Well, Governor, you're the last speaker tonight. You're between them and dinner, but...
Wow. You know, you go to a good concert, it's always the last one who's the best. They hold them to the very end.
Exactly right. Let me start, and we'll open it up for some questions, but you came into Ohio, tough economic times, tough budget situation. What did you do to turn around?
Let me start so I can see everybody. Let me tell you, this all started when I was a kid. I was elected to the Ohio Senate at the age of 26, promising no taxes. And 2 years in, the Republicans won a majority and decided to raise taxes. And I said, well, you know, I'm not going to go for that. And they called me irresponsible, which is what they call you. And so I wrote my own budget. That was the first time it happened at the age of 28. And I had people sneaking into my office telling me about how we could clean everything up. I lost, but I made a big statement, and we had a lot of really good ideas. I went to Congress, and for the first 6 years, I served on the Defense Committee, but 6 years in, I was selected to go on the Budget Committee, and I went to my first Budget Committee meeting. And it wasn't going very well. I was not impressed with the Republican budget, the Democrat budget. I went back to Ohio, and I was at a gas station complaining about it, Tom, and somebody walked around the corner and said, well, if you don't like what's going on here, what are you going to do about it? So I flew to Washington, and I met with my staff, and I said, look, we're going to write a budget for the country. They said, I don't know how we're going to do that. There's 100 people at the White House working on a budget and 100 people up here on Capitol Hill, and we only have 6. And I said, yeah, if we stay out of each other's way, we'll be able to get it done, you know. And so in 1989 was my first budget in Washington, and the vote was 405 against me and 30 for me. And my friends were all down. I said, I think it's fantastic. We got 29 other people that think we can run the country. So I kept offering my own proposals. They became more sophisticated, and we built a larger and larger team. And in my third budget, I got more votes than President Bush got for his budget. So the idea of whether this is a Republican or a Democrat doesn't matter that much to me. And then I moved up. I became the senior Republican. I've written about 18 budgets in my lifetime. And then I joined with Tim Penny to try to take a penny out of every dollar to cut spending. And we were opposed by Hillary, the White House. She was literally lobbying, and the Republican Appropriations Committee. And we got very close within about 5 votes. And then I became the chairman of the Budget Committee, and you know, continued to work and build a bigger and bigger team, taking on all these tough issues. And then, of course, I became the chief architect, Pete Domenici and I, of the last time we balanced the budget, the first time since man walked on the moon, and we haven't done it since, with a $5 trillion surplus, and we actually paid down the debt. Now, here's the other thing you should all know, and Tom alluded to it. So I go in to be governor of Ohio. We're $8 billion in the hole, which is a historic high, 20% of our general revenue fund. And all I did was take the practices from Washington, and what are they? You just go do the job. You don't sit around worrying about who's going to yelp and scream, and try to come up with something that is going to work, that people can accept, but you just got to make choices. But you got to be as creative as you possibly can. So $8 billion in the hole. Everybody said raise taxes. I said, no, baloney. If you have a restaurant and you don't have any customers, you don't raise your prices. You lower your prices, you change the menu, and you reduce your overhead. So in Ohio, we went from $8 billion in the hole, and today we're $2 billion in surplus. We're up 347,000 jobs. We are rock solid with our credit. There's no phony baloney in this budget. And we've cut taxes by $5 billion, because you got to remember, even in Washington, not only did we have a program to reduce our overhead, but we also cut our prices. And we reduced the taxes on capital gains, and we provided a family tax credit. There was not an economic growth other than giving people more money in their pockets, but capital gains helped. And you balance a budget by restraining your spending and also growing your economy. And you know, you just have to rally people to get behind something for the good of something other than themselves. And then I'll give you one little story, though. In our state, Medicaid, when I came in, was growing at 10%. In my second budget, it grew at 2.5%, And we didn't take one single person off the rolls, and we did not cut one benefit. So you might say, how do you do that? Well, one of the groups I had to fight was the nursing home industry. They basically had called everything in Ohio for many years. I'm not against nursing homes, but I'm against sky-high reimbursement rates, and I want mom and dad to be able to stay in their own home if they can, rather than being forced into a nursing home. And we use technology, and so the industry was very angry at me. They tried to keep me from getting elected, and then they fought me when I did get elected, and I had to take them on. And so imagine controlling the hardest element of a state budget, and to have Medicaid go from 10% to like 2.5% without taking anybody off the rolls. People like it. So you see, when you go about doing this, everything doesn't have to be slash and burn. It's trying to figure out the most effective way you can do it to serve the customer. And by the way, on Thursday, this Thursday, I'm going to be unveiling a plan, a framework that will become more and more sophisticated as time goes on, that deals with spending, the issue of fiscal discipline and balanced budgets, being able to provide economic growth in a variety of ways. And this is going to come Thursday. I'm going to make a speech in Nashua. If you want to come down, we'd love to have you there. And I think it's going to give us a roadmap. It's a roadmap what John Kasich would do if I'm elected President of the United States. And it will be comprehensive. Yeah, you can clap. Go ahead. I like that. So, a lot of people talk about doing it, but you have to know how to do it. You have to put teams of people together. You have to tell them, pay no attention to the special interest groups. I mean, you can listen to them, and if they have a legitimate objection, that's fine, but they don't call the tune. Nobody who gives you money, you cannot play that game. Because the minute you come off of the high moral ground, which is the issue of we need to do this for our kids, we need to do this for our country, we need to do this for our state, when you do that, people can accept, by and large, what you're doing. But if all of a sudden Uncle Joe gets a sweetheart deal, or right here, Joe Lieberman, or anybody else gets a certain deal, then you know what happens is, then people say, well, why them and not me? So it's difficult, it's challenging, but it's absolutely doable. And you want to get there by 2030? That's too long. That's too long. I mean, I think you can get there before 2030, and we'll give you a sense of all this come Thursday, but that's not necessary. That is not a necessary thing to do. And you have to deal with all the entitlements. You got to deal with Medicaid, you got to deal with Medicare, and ultimately, I think, like with Social Security, that's going to have to be done over time with Republicans and Democrats really working together. See, the problem is if you try to reform these entitlement programs and you don't have some members of both parties participating, it probably won't happen. When you go back to the Clinton years when he was president, and we forced him to balance the budget. I'm sorry, Joe, but Clinton's a skilled politician. If there's a ride coming at him, he jumps in front of it and calls it a parade. But at that point, you know, he had some people in there that really wanted to get this done. And when we did it with both parties participating, nobody screamed about Medicare. Nobody screamed about Medicaid. Nobody really even screamed about welfare reform, which was another very significant thing that we did. So, look, in war you die once. Churchill said in politics you can die 10 or 15 times. Just look at my friend here from Ohio. How many times did you die in politics? Many, many. So that's what you have to do. And just, you know, shoot for the stars, have big ideas, be creative, be imaginative, and look at every way to get this thing done. And then I have to tell you, folks, one other thing. If you don't have a balanced budget amendment that requires a federally balanced budget, you will never be able to do it consistently. We need a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution to force politicians to do what we did. Now, some of you are not clapping about that, But I can tell you, if we didn't have a balanced budget requirement in Ohio, I don't think we'd be balanced. I mean, it forces people to be responsible. It would be great. It would be wonderful if we would just do it naturally. But I'm not some, somebody living in Lake Wobegon. If you have the requirement, think about this. I left Washington after 2000. We had a $5 trillion surplus. I went home to Ohio, and my buddy said, now that your friends are leaving, they're going to spend it all. I said, that's impossible. You can't spend $5 trillion. I mean, you have to work to spend it all. And it was all gone in the blink of an eye. And we could have used that $5 trillion to provide, we could have provided a 2% private account for all the young people in the country, funded out of that surplus. But it's all gone. It was gone. So, and why was it gone? All politicians are tarred with the same stick. They want to spend money. And somebody's got to stand in the breach and say, no, we can't do that. Just like a mom and dad stand on the breach when members of their family want to spend money they don't have. You just have to do that. And I think the constitutional amendment is vital. Okay.
Governor, talk about, we're going to take some questions from the audience. We got about 15 minutes for questions. Let me just ask, though, getting those jobs in Ohio, it was a very tough time. What did you do different?
Well, we privatized our economic development. It doesn't exist in the government anymore. We created a not-for-profit entity. And this entity, make a long story short, they get about $100 million a year of liquor revenue. And we have hired people that actually can talk to business people. Secondly, we looked at Ohio and we figured out which of the areas of Ohio we could sell diversity. So we have cloud computing, IT, financial services, energy, medical devices, steel and manufacturing, agriculture. We are now a diverse state, different than the way you thought about Ohio. And I tell you why it happens. I talk to the CEOs. When you balance budgets and cut taxes, and you, as the CEO, understand business, I'm the CEO of Ohio. You think, I'm the governor, I'm the CEO of Ohio. You convince people to come. And that's how we're up to 347,000 jobs. It is about understanding how businesses work, how they decide things, and make sure that the government, both from a tax, from a spending, and regulatory, that's another thing that's crushing our country, is this over-aggressive regulations. There needs to be common sense. We'll deal with that on Thursday. But if you can, in fact, balance a budget or head towards it, reduce the taxes, particularly on businesses in America now. I mean, having the highest corporate tax rate is just nuts. Okay, we need to get that money back here because companies are investing in Europe and they ought to be investing in America because we tax their profits so high they just don't bring the money back. And get a regulatory regime going the right way. And one final thing, trade. These trade deals ought to it shouldn't be a good deal or a bad deal. They ought to be improved. And then when we get violated, because of companies taking advantage of it, we have to have an expedited process that doesn't drag out for years, and then we win, and everybody that was affected lost their jobs. I mean, there's so much to do. Workforce development. It's a big, comprehensive package, but if you can't balance a budget, you can't control your spending, businesses will go somewhere else. And if your taxes are too high, they will go somewhere else. And the proof is in the pudding. We were dead in Ohio, and now we're alive. Not only alive, we're thriving, and it's great, and as a result, no one has been left behind. I mean, if you're the mentally ill, if you're the drug addicted, if you're the working poor, we got a program for you. If you're developmentally disabled, we want to mainstream you. Economic growth solves so many problems and allows you to do so many wonderful things for the public.
Thank you. First question.
Thank you so much for being here. It's a privilege. You may be the first Republican that I might vote for and even campaign for. Okay, so I am a...
Why don't we take the might out and that would be perfect.
But for this.
Okay.
Okay, I am fiscally conservative and socially liberal.
Yeah.
Like, gosh, it seems every person I seem to meet. So what I don't understand is all this focus on, again, what I would consider to be social issues, the economic impact of a Planned Parenthood, I'm sorry, it's just not significant. And I said earlier, actually, to Donald Trump, I said, it's like a deck chair everyone keeps trying to rearrange, and the Titanic, it's like, oh my gosh, we hit the iceberg. $19 trillion, we're one of the most imprisoned drug society in the world. Every kingdom on earth is threatened. I'm looking for trying to understand the thinking behind the world behind your eyes. It's like, where are you really going to focus?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, our recidivism rate in the prisons in Ohio is almost half the national average. And we're now treating the drug addicted in the prisons and releasing them into the community, and the recidivism rate is less than 20%. So we are giving people a chance to get out and get on their feet so they can become productive citizens. Planned Parenthood, look, I don't care what your position is on that. We need to have family planning. It just shouldn't be done by those. They went too far, and it needs to be stripped out. But that doesn't mean we don't do family planning. I think our greatest, there's a lot of moral purposes, great ones, but creating a job which allows a mom and dad to support a family is so important. Think about a dad who goes home at night, because my dad carried mail on his back. I grew up in a blue-collar town, and if the wind blew the wrong way, Dad had to go home and look at his kids and his spouse or mom and say, I lost my job today. Things are going to change around here. Think about how great it is when mom or dad goes home, and particularly the single mom, and says, I got a better job, or I got a raise, or things are going great. We celebrate, right? We go out to dinner. Maybe we even get a shrimp cocktail if things are going really well, right? So we have to focus on economic growth. That doesn't mean these moral issues don't matter. They do matter, but we've got to get this country moving from the standpoint of stronger economic growth, helping families, training workers, having common sense regulations, and one other thing. We need to begin to transfer power, money, and influence back to where we live. And I'm going to give you one example. Why do we send gas tax money to Washington so they can scam it off the top and send less back? Why don't we just keep it here and take care of our own infrastructure? And think about this. We can send a couple pennies down to maintain the interstate, but we're not building any more interstate. So what we ought to be doing is keeping our money to solve our problems based on the way we can do it. We have not lost faith in ourselves. So we need to systematically, we'll have more to say about this on Thursday, we need to systematically begin to move programs back to where we live, where we then take responsibility. It's not like we get them and then we do nothing. We get them and we have to be responsible with what we do with those programs. So a little bit about the things that I think about.
We have another question.
And take the might out. I'll give you a gold star. How's that? Yeah.
We have a question back here.
Governor Kasich, what's your plan for fixing Social Security and Medicare?
Well, look, on Social Security, in '99, I wrote a plan that would have kept our seniors held harmless, would have changed the wages and prices to one of the indices, which meant we would have started a little less in our initial benefit, and over time it saves a ton of money. And then for the young people, they would have had a 2% private account. I left Washington, and they did nothing for 16 or 17 years. So now we're deeper in the hole. What I think you have to do with Social Security is gather up all the plans that everybody has, consider everything, get it on the table, and get Democrats and Republicans to hold hands and agree to solidify that program. It has to be done. In terms of Medicare, I'll have more to say about Medicare and Medicaid on Thursday. But when you think about what we did with Medicaid in Ohio, there's a lot of similarities to what we can do with Medicare. We'll have more to say about it on Thursday without getting into it. But you can't get to a balanced budget if you don't deal with the entitlement programs. You have to deal with them. I've dealt with them throughout my career, and I would say to you, I think I've written 18 budgets in my lifetime. It's not a mystery as to what I will do. It's not a confusion about what I might do. We'll just give you more as time goes on. Now, come Thursday, we're going to give you a plan, a framework that will increasingly be filled out as we go along. We'll be addressing Social Security, the specifics of that, probably a little bit later, but we will deal with Medicaid, Medicare, discretionary, defense spending, all of it. And we will give you a framework as to what that all means. So I hope you will come. Come on Thursday if you can, in Nashua. Here's one here.
Okay.
I don't know. Where is it in Nashua? Does anybody know? Yell. Where's the event on Thursday?
Community college.
The community college. Good.
All right, we're back here.
And by the way, we also are putting together plans for the ways to deal with the cost increases in our universities and community colleges using business-like processes, and I'll give you one. Why do these colleges and universities have non-academic assets that we have to pay money to support? Why don't they get rid of them and let somebody else run them and let a college and university do what it's supposed to do, which is educate us, not run parking garages or dining rooms? We can do that. Yes, sir.
Stephen Bourne, Rye, New Hampshire. So one of the reasons why I sort of got more into politics was I went to a local budget meeting, and one of the things, it's going up $200,000. I asked, what more are we going to get for that $200,000? I get lambasted about why am I questioning it. And so every time I hear budget, what I want to know is, what are we getting for it? How do we know we're getting better services for the same money all the time? And I'm struggling at the local level. So I get it's going to be a gazillion times harder at the federal. But we need the analysis. We need to know, what are we getting and what are we getting for everything we're spending? That discussion doesn't get out to the people.
Right. Well, look, do you understand, in taking an $8 billion hole in Ohio and turning it into a surplus and taking hundreds of billions of dollars worth of deficits and a rising national debt and getting it to balance and actually paying down a chunk of the publicly held debt? We didn't do that without good analysis. Frankly, I will tell you, there's too much, and I really don't want to say this, but I'll say it. We don't need to have all of those entities operating in Washington. You know, when I was in Congress, we tried to kill the Commerce Department, and I'll tell you why. There has some valuable things that go on in it, but it's basically an attic for political junkies where their kids go to work after a successful election. We got too much down there, and because we have too much, they don't do much of what they do as well as we want them to do it. When Joe and I were in Washington, if you wanted a family to go to the White House, you had to spend 2 weeks to get tickets. Now you just jump over the fence. I mean, it's because this doesn't work well anywhere. So, sir, let me tell you, if you think you can make those questions without aggravating people, you're wrong. You got to be tough, but you got to tell them that our town will lose jobs, our taxes are going to be too high for small businesses. Remember, small businesses create the jobs. And if in a little town you keep raising taxes or have a building code group that just makes it so hard for somebody to open their doors, guess what? They're going somewhere else. They may be coming to Ohio, and that'd be okay too. So, but you have to question people, and you have to say, what do you get for it? And they're not going to like it, but that's okay. You know what'll happen over time? They'll respect you. There was a group of people, including Chris Shays, who's back here. We took everybody on. We took them all on. I've been involved in reforming the Pentagon. You know what it's like to be a Republican reforming the Pentagon and trying to stop the development of a B-2 bomber and limit its production? When it's, when it's $1 billion a copy, you know how hard that is? I mean, but you have to do it because you're not in this business to win a popularity contest. You're in this business to be an adult, to make decisions, to advance the country. That's what you're in it for. Can't answer it? And when you get really frustrated, give me a call. I'll buck you up. They don't hate you. You're just bothering them, but they'll be okay. They'll respect you over time. The public, you got to do it. Look, leadership is walking a lonely road. And as hard as you work at that, you will find, if you know what you're doing, probably do, you'll find more people that will gravitate to your side. My first budget was 405 to 30. My third budget was more than what George Bush got for his budget. It happens over time, but make sure your ideas are creative, innovative, and different. And if you do that, people will come to you, and they may sneak up to you. You got anybody kind of telling you on the sly, hey, that's probably a good question? Is any of that happening?
He like tapped out like.
A few, not none, a few. Keep at it.
Let's go one more question right here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Jess Lubian from Manchester, New Hampshire. Thank you for taking my question. I have a very specific question for you. Can you give us an example when you were working to solve an important problem, a specific example of a compromise that you made that up until that point you previously didn't think you were willing to compromise on?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, you know, look, when I was working to limit the production of the B-2 to 13 weapons, and Dick Cheney called me up and he said, okay, I'll make an agreement with you to go to 20. And I had been working with Ron Dellums on this, who's a very liberal Democrat. I said, well, I got to check with my partner. So I called Dellums. I said, what do you think? He said, well, I'm against it. I said, I got to go to 20. This, I think, is a reasonable proposal. Yes, we can do that. Yeah, I think compromise is part of it, but you can never compromise beyond where you can't look yourself in the eye. Because look, see, you're looking at all these candidates, okay? I'm not in this. I am in this to fix the country. I am not in this so I can have some great election. That's why I'm not going to tell you something that you want to hear. Lady back here just said, well, if you would change. I said, I'm not changing. I'll listen to you. I'm not unconvinced on a different issue. My mind's eye is to just try, and I'm a flawed man, just try to do the best thing to improve our nation. And then when I'm done, I'm happy. And that's what I want to be through this campaign, and if I get elected, as best I can to navigate. But compromise is part of it. Just don't compromise beyond your principles. I'll give you an area where I would not compromise. I'm not for more revenue. And I'm not for more revenue because this is some ideological thing. It's an economic thing, and frankly, I know what they do down there in Washington. Why do I want to give them more revenue? And anytime you do a deal and you say, okay, this many cuts for this much revenue, all they do is take the revenue and they never give us the cuts. And then they come up with these phony baloney plans, these sequester and all this other stuff that it all gets changed at the end of the day. Let's balance the budget, pass a constitutional amendment, and get it done, and stop this fooling around. This is our kids that are going to pay the price for it. So,
All right, we have time.
and look, I can't remember anything really specifically, but I can't sit down with Pete Domenici and negotiate an entire federal budget without having to give on some things. I mean, nothing glaring stands out at me, but I couldn't get everything I wanted. I mean, who gets everything they want? Nobody, not in life. And so, but never give up your fundamental principle. That's as well as I can answer that.
Thank you. We have time for one more question over here in the back.
Sir, hi. Thank you for being here. My name is Chris Meadows. I'm from Deering, New Hampshire. I know you chose me because you wanted the voice of the college student. I'm a sophomore at New England College. Thank you. My question is about gun control. When the president says that it's routine now, and his responses to the questions are routine, it's too much. What do we do about gun control when there's almost a gun for every man, woman, and child in the country? There are too many guns.
Yeah.
They end up in the hands of the people we don't want them in. So how do we fix that? Do we take people's guns away, and how do we get people to not freak out when we want to do that?
Well, first of all, we're not going to take their guns away. It's the Second Amendment, and we're not going to do that. But let me just say a couple things. First of all, there are laws that are on the books. I'll give you a couple. You're at a gun show, they're supposed to do an instant check. They must do it. You want to sell something in a parking lot, you're held accountable if you sell it to somebody and you didn't check out who they were. Thirdly, there are many states that are not keeping the mental health records that need to be kept and entered into a database so people who have mental illness can't get guns. But I'm glad you asked that, because I'm going to talk about something I just want you to think about. You see, we're focusing on the gun. Let's talk about the people. this person, this guy who committed the mass murder in Oregon, it was his mother, he and his mother. Where was dad? Where was brother or sister? Where was neighbor? I mean, folks, our marriages, too many of them, have eroded. The relationship with our neighbors. What's happened to the neighborhood? You see, we're all really our neighbor's keeper, and we all have a responsibility to live a life bigger than ourselves. It's about justice and healing, and who's helping this woman? Cray Deeds down in Virginia. This is something the government could have done. There was not an emergency bed for his son. He took his son home, and the next day, a tragedy occurred where he was stabbed and his son is gone. Why didn't we have the beds? Is it because we run over people who we don't understand? But what are we doing to help one another? We're spending a lot of our time worrying about who's going to be president, and that's great. But the country was not built from the top down. The country was built from the bottom up. You heard the Pope the other day about the power of family, the Pope about all of us being connected. So the laws on guns should be enforced. I think we can respect the Second Amendment, but what about the other things that we're not doing that could have averted some of these tragedies? What are we doing to think about the things that we as a society can do, sometimes without government, to make sure that our neighborhoods are stronger, so that people don't live alone? That woman, that mother, could not control her son, and she had nowhere to go. A week ago or 2 weeks ago, I went to a place called Hope House. It was in Iowa. I don't know why I think I know why they took me there. It's a house for women who really have gotten to the edge of falling apart. Beautiful place, wonderful people. I said, why is this here? Because there's nowhere for people to go now. We're isolated, we're alone too much of the time. One of my jobs, if I'm president, is to think about a way where we can reignite the spirit of who we are as Americans. When de Tocqueville came here, he talked about who we were. And we need to reignite that, endorse that model of strong families and strong neighborhoods and living a life beyond ourselves. We have responsibility that way. And that even in some ways takes us back to the budget. That if you're going to be elected to public service and you're going to go and serve, do your job. Don't worry about re-election. Just go do your job, and guess what? You'll get re-elected. Just ask Lieberman, who fought everybody down there. You did win, didn't you? Yeah, he did win. You can lead and you can win, and you know what? You can feel good about yourself even if you don't win. And over the long haul, that's where the treasure is. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.